In this video, we're going to follow along the restoration of an icon of Ave Maria on wood. When this piece arrived, I was impressed with the extent of the damage and just how precarious the piece was. As you can see, there are massive sections of loss. Lots of the paint has completely detached from the wood structure, the paint is flaking all over, and it's incredibly dirty. So before I can even begin to think about any restoration procedures, I have to address the fact that all of this paint is literally detached from the wood support. So carefully, I'll remove the pieces of paint that have completely detached, and I'll place them on an acid-free piece of foam core. I'll try to keep them aligned so that I know where they'll be returned to during the restoration process. I'll also use digital photography to document the location of these pieces so that they aren't lost or misplaced during the next steps. In this case, the main reason for the separation of the paint from the panel was not only due to the movement of the wood, but poor preparation of the panel itself, as the paint layer separated at the gesso. So I'll remove all of the old gesso, all of the old rabbit skin glue, and any other materials I find on the panel to reveal the raw wood so that I can stabilize it and prepare a new layer for the paint. In addition to being quite damaged, this wood had suffered pest infestation and rot over time, and wasn't really providing a stable support for the painting. Now, there would be an argument to be made to remove the painting completely from the wood and transfer it to a new superstructure, but in this case, the client wanted to keep as much original as possible, and I agreed with him. So I'm injecting a B72 resin into all of the voids of the wood, and I'm going to fill them with this B72 to not only solidify the wood, to fill the gaps, and to stabilize it. And this B72 resin is stable, it's reversible, and it'll fill the gaps so that all of the open areas will be solid. The back of the structure shows just how damaged the wood is due to rot and pest infestation. So again, I'm going to inject the resin into all the gaps to fill those gaps and stabilize the wood, and I'm going to brush the resin on so that it penetrates into all of those voids. And I'll repeat this process until the wood is completely saturated and can accept no more resin. With the resin dry, we can start to see how all of those voids have been filled. Now this not only creates a smooth surface onto which I can prime and prepare the wood panel, but it also ensures that the wood isn't going to move anymore because this resin will act as an adhesive and hold those two pieces of wood together. So I'll go ahead and, using a scalpel and the sensitive touch of bare fingers, remove any excess resin that's on the surface of the wood. Now here I'm using an acrylic gesso that I'll modify so that it has better penetrating properties, because when I apply this first layer of gesso to the wood, I want it to penetrate deep into the wood pores to ensure that there's a good bond for the successive layers so that any fill-in and retouching that I do after the painting is fully cleaned won't suffer the same fate of detaching as the original paint did. So just working slowly and very carefully, I'm going to make sure that the entire area of exposed wood is covered. I'll let it dry and I'll repeat, I'll let it dry and I'll repeat over and over again. Now before I can start cleaning the painting, I have to stabilize and secure all of these pieces of paint that have somewhat detached from the wood, but not completely. So here I'm using a heat-activated and solvent-activated solvent, and I'm injecting it into and under and around all of the areas where there is lifting. In this case, I have to penetrate the paint layer to access the void underneath and inject the adhesive. Again, penetrating the paint layer, injecting the adhesive until there's maximum saturation. Later, I'll come back and I'll activate the adhesive and bond this paint layer back down to the wood. So moving through all of the areas that you can see that are lifting and flaking, I will inject the adhesive, let it cool and dry, and then come back at a later time with heat and pressure and stabilize all of these areas so that they won't be at risk of flaking. Now with all of the loose paint layers stabilized, I can lay down a layer of adhesive and to begin to put the puzzle back together. Taking all of those pieces of completely detached paint and placing them back onto the wood structure that has been primed, I can ensure that there's going to be a good bond. Now luckily the pieces are fairly large and the image is a good guide, but I will refer back to the digital images that I took earlier if I find myself a little lost as to where a piece will go. Even the smallest pieces need to be placed back where they belong and secured to fit. Once this adhesive dries, there's not much room for maneuvering the pieces of paint layer, so I want to make sure that I have a good solid fit from the get-go. Now with the adhesive fully dry, I can begin bonding all of those pieces of paint back down to the wood. So here I'm using a heating iron, a piece of silicone release film, and a piece of felt to apply even, distributed, and mild heat to the surface of the painting. The silicone release film makes sure that nothing sticks. The felt allows me to apply pressure without damaging the surface of the painting. Now finally, with all the paint stabilized, I can begin the cleaning process. After making quite a few tests to understand what was on the surface and settling on it being an accumulation of linseed oil, I decided on using a gelled solvent to remove the built-up grime. Now linseed oil is not easy to remove, but the gelled solvent does allow me to soften it and then remove it. Now I know a lot of commenters are going to say that I should never start in the face, but in fact I made dozens of tests all throughout the painting before I began working on this, and for the purposes of making an interesting video, working on the face and the main figure is a little bit more entertaining than working on the background. Nonetheless, I will work to clean off all of the linseed oil from the background and from the gilded areas to reveal the gold. Now some areas can't be removed with solvent, and so I'll turn to a scalpel to delicately scrape off that built-up grime. With the painting fully cleaned, I can begin to start building up a new base layer of gesso and putty so that we have a smooth surface onto which I can do the retouching. There's nothing complicated about this. It's just a matter of building up layer after layer until we have a nice, proud surface that I can then remove with a scalpel and swabs. And again, people are going to say, why aren't you using gloves? And it's because I can't feel the surface through latex or nitrile gloves. But with my bare fingers, I can feel it. And I want to make sure that I have the perfect surface for the retouching. Now, before any retouching can begin, I first must remove any excess fill-in material from the surface of the painting in preparation for an isolation layer of varnish to be applied. Now, this isolation layer is going to be B72 resin, and it's going to be brushed on, and it's going to serve two purposes. One, it's going to isolate the original work from any additional work that I do, the retouching and the regilding, and two, it's going to saturate the colors and simulate what they'll look like when they're finally varnished, because I want to make sure that my retouching matches what the painting will look like in its final state. Now, at one point, this icon was heavily embellished with gold leaf, but over time, much of that original leaf was lost. Luckily, there is some still left to provide a guide, and so I'm going to be regilding it using traditional gilding techniques. You saw me applying a size, and here I'm cutting the leaf into small, manageable sections, and I'll apply it to the size, tamp it down with the brush, and then using other brushes, I will ensure that it's got a good bond and remove the excess. I'll work the leaf with various tools, and I'll tone it with a tinted shellac to make sure that it matches the original. Now with the painting fully stabilized, filled in, I'm ready to begin the retouching. Now in this case, I'm using a different retouching method than you've seen me use before. For this piece, I'm going to be using an Italian technique called tratteggio. You have to pardon me if my pronunciation isn't perfect, but it means to sketch or to hash out in Italian. And the particular technique I'm using is called rigatino, which means stripes. So effectively, I'm sketching with vertical stripes. And the goal of this technique is to conceal or camouflage the damage to the eye, but not completely imitate what was there. So the goal is, at a few feet back, you can start to see the image come together, but as you get closer, you can see the restoration work that I've done. And that's an appropriate method for working on old masterpieces or icons where we want to preserve some semblance of artifact, but still allow the piece to look complete and full. And the last step, with the retouching all complete, is to apply a new ultraviolet stable, fully reversible varnish. In this case, I'm using a Regalres varnish with a Tinuin 292 stabilizer. And this is a fully reversible, ultraviolet stable conservator's varnish. And I'm brushing it on in this case because I don't want to spray it and cover the entire piece. So, as you can see, the piece is fully conserved. The damage has been addressed while still preserving some of the artifact qualities of the piece, and I'm very satisfied with how it turned out.